All right, guys, so today's a brand new day. Weather is crazy here in LA for some reason. 2 days ago was in the 90s, today is in the 60s. So yeah, this shift of up and downs is kind of crazy, but so is this camera right here, the D200. D200 came out in 2005. I bought it in 2006, about March, I would say, and it would cost back then around $1,650. Back when I got this camera, it was perhaps the best camera that was out in the market. It could go head to head with all the Canons, and at that time I believe Sony had just come out with the first camera as well. So this camera did a lot for me. Here it is. This camera here is very awesome. It's perhaps the best camera I owned prior to getting a full frame. And that's not saying much, to be honest, but the thing is that I made quite a bit of cash with this thing when it first came out. And also at the same time, when it first came out, I was into every type of photography. It didn't matter what it came my way, I would do it. And that's the way most people are. They start that way and then they evolve into something they like. They start testing every route there is and seeing what's the best route for them. For me, it turned out to be that pet photography and real estate was the way to go. Eventually let go of pet photography and then just stuck with real estate. So that's where I'm at right now. That's what I like. And now I'm evolving into the video world as well, which was kind of late if you would say so, but I really like it. D200 right here was an awesome camera. It was a workhorse. Every photographer that I knew back then, didn't matter what kind of genre or what kind of photography they would do, this is the camera that they had. The D200 eventually evolved to the D300, which was a lot better of a camera, but I never went that direction. So the D200 back then, its peak ISO level was 1600, and you can push it up 2 more stops, or 1 more stop, that is H1 and H2, I believe. At 1600, this camera is just basically crap, you know, so you can't put it, you can't really push it that much. The best it could do perhaps is ISO 400. Pushing it to 800 was iffy. You can still go to 800. I would go maybe the most up to 1200, but if you went to 1600, it was way too much. To get decent images, I would say stay within ISO 400 to 800 at the most. 10 megapixels. File sizes are insane small. They're 15 megabytes per file size on RAW, and that's 12 bits as well. JPEGs are 8 bits and they're usually very small. They're about 1.5 to 2 megabytes at the most, being 10 megapixels for that matter. So it's also a crop sensor. The crop sensor in this camera was very nice. It had a pretty decent dynamic range, but for its time, it was very decent. And this is 2006, 7. I believe 2008 was when the D700 came out. And that's when I upgraded to the D700 when I really wanted to go full frame. But in the meantime, I was using this camera for just about everything. So other features of this camera was the fact that it ran on CF Express cards. That's new stuff. Has a single slot compact flash card, and with 8 gigs, you can get up to about 500 shots. The battery life on this thing was pretty decent too. You can get about 200 to 300 shots per battery charge in this camera at that time. Now, this thing, like I was saying, it's an APS-C camera. It's a crop sensor. But every lens that I own was full frame. The full frame lenses here work really nice. They're perhaps the sharpest, and this is by far one of my favorite lenses. This is a 55 2.8 micro lens that's manual, and it's really dope. I've shown you guys this lens before, and it's by far one of the sharpest lenses I own. When I first got into this camera, it came equipped with basically, I think, a 1.2 105 manual lens, a 24 2.8 manual as well, had a 50 1.2, and a couple of other ones which I do not recall. Those are the main ones, and the reason why I recall them is because with those glasses I was able to shoot quite a bit of nice stuff in this camera here, but I sold them, and I sold them probably, I would say, early 2007. I did not think those lenses were any good due to the fact that I was quite new at that time to digital cameras. I thought they were old school. They were like not gonna perform well with this camera because I did not want to mess around with the focusing, which was ignorant of me at that time. As you can see, now I miss them. I wish I would have never sold them. I eBayed those lenses for probably 150 bucks a pop or something like that, which at that time was really cheap. Everybody was asking about 400. I was like, no one's gonna give me 400. And surprise, surprise, I ended up selling them within an hour every single time with one of those lenses. So I guess they were very, very popular then as they are now. The latest DSLR that I have is the D810, and it's basically the same thing as this one, where you can switch here to this thing from manual to continuous to single shot for your sensoring and your focusing. The newer ones are a little different because they have a button in there, but basically it's the same style, it's the same configuration, so you can go from one camera to the other. It also has a built-in flash. The built-in flash was quite decent. I did use it to do flash triggering. So I would use this flash in, I forgot what it's called. Let me see what it's called. Commander mode. That's what it's called, commander mode. So I would use commander mode, and then I would trigger all the other native speed lights from Nikon, and then I would do multiple flash scenarios and whatnot, but I would use this to trigger everything. And that's how I got started with trigger remote speed lights. Now I do not do that anymore. I just use actual triggers. I can have the lights wherever I want and they all go off, and it's quite insane, quite nice. That's the way it should be. I hope you're working that way as well, because onboard flash is no good unless you were to use it for the same situation that I just mentioned, which was for commander mode, which was to trigger your additional flashes. Back then as well, there was no video in all the cameras, so although you have all these compartments here, it was only for you to connect it to the computer and do your tethering, external power this camera, and it has your video out. It's pretty much a 3.5, I believe, or maybe a smaller jack that goes in there. And then you have to use adapters so you can watch the videos. It did come with the camera. I have no clue where those adapters are. Even though it has video out, it's only for you to view what's coming out here in the monitor. It is not actual true video. It's just to monitor what it is you're doing. That's all. As far as the focusing points, it has single point, group, and then your other group, I forgot what that's called, and then your basic dynamic automatic mode. The focusing system here, unlike the newer cameras that have up to 51 points, or maybe more than that, I think the newer ones actually have over 200 to 400 points. I never use them really, to be honest. Maybe because I do not do a lot of portraits or any other kind of motion photography. This one only came with 7 and 11, so depending on the kind of group that you want to use, the focusing point can be either smaller or bigger. Those 11 points were the best because they were a lot smaller, so you have a bigger area to smaller area to choose from and be more precise. Eventually though, like I said, I moved away from this camera to the D700, and that's because when I started doing events, I required a wider lens, and APS-C sensor style was not doing the job for me no more, because I was doing a lot of political events, and most of the time I was stuck in press rooms, and those press rooms were small, or the fact that it was packed with people and there wasn't enough room. So I needed a wider angle to do the photography that I needed to capture sometimes group shots in a small 10-foot area, and for that reason I needed something wider. Then full frame came along. That was the call for me, and I moved on from this camera. I will still use it as my backup, and the fact that it's a crop sensor is actually quite nice, because when I first purchased this camera, all those other manual lenses that I mentioned earlier, all of those lenses did not really come with the camera, but I acquired those lenses because my dad had them. Eventually I realized that I should have never sold them, like I said, but when I bought this camera, I bought it with the 70-200. So my 70-200 and this camera are the same age. I bought them back in 2006, and they both still work quite nice with this camera, any camera that I have. But using it with this camera here, the 70-200 would turn into, what is that? Maybe like a 70. So it'll be a 105 to 300. When I would use the 70-200 with this camera, it would be a 105 to 300, which will give you more range, which was quite nice. So that's why I liked using it with this. Eventually moved on to the D810, and the D700 and the D810 were paired well for me, and this camera was basically put aside 100%. Before that, it was the go-to camera. And to be honest, if you really like the Sony a7S III, which does awesome video, but it can only do 10 or 12 megapixel pictures, then this is at par with that. except for the fact that this was an older camera from way 2005. So is it something that you may want to use today? I would say if you're a YouTuber and you want it for thumbnails, this is the perfect camera. If you want to take a lot of photos and not use too much space on your memory card, this is perhaps the way to go. The only reason you would go with something much bigger, much better that's available right now is because you want the sharpness or you want the resolution of what it is that you're shooting in the backdrop or whatnot. But if you're shooting something close within the 20 feet or whatnot, this thing will do the job just fine. I stopped using it because I needed something much bigger. It's not because it wasn't a good camera. It's the fact that I just liked the aspect ratio of full frame. And that's when I jumped to full frame and I never looked back. This is my last APS-C camera that I ever owned. And I don't think I'm going back, but I do have a special attachment to this camera because it was where I started. To be honest, I started even way before that, but I never took up on going pro or on my own until about maybe 2007, 8. But yeah, 2007 or 8 is when I actually went on my own. Prior to that, I was doing a lot of photography, but I was doing it with friends or other photographers as their second shooters. I would never tell you that this is the right camera for you now, nor would I tell you it is the wrong camera for you today either. Because this camera has a lot of potential, much like the D700. A lot of people love this camera, and there's a reason for it, and it's because it will go the extra mile with you and stay along your side regardless what the reason it might be. So for that reason, I would say if you want it, can't go wrong with it. For being an older camera though, it still throws a very nice punch. It's up to you whether you think you want to keep it. I'm gonna keep the memories and the good times I had with it. With that, thank you for watching. This video should probably bring me close to 1,000, if not surpass 1,000 subscribers by this time. Thank you guys. It's been real nice